Hello everyone, my name is Yara, and today I'm going to be talking about my reading goals for 2025. I used to be very anti-goal setting when it came to books. I thought of myself as a mood reader for the longest time, and I guess I still do. But back in the fall, I made a fall TBR, and at the time I was like, let me just do this and see if I actually read them. And I did. I read nearly every book that I said I was going to read in that video. Granted, it probably took me a little longer than just the fall to read them, but I still read them all. Similarly, last year during Middle Grade Magic Readathon, I read every single book that was on my TBR, and so now I'm like, am I actually not a mood reader? Can I actually stick to TBRs now? I don't know when or where this change happened, maybe because I turned 25 and my prefrontal cortex is now more developed. But anywho, going off of that high, we're going to be setting more goals for this year, and maybe I'll actually fulfill them. So the first thing is the overall number of books that I want to read in 2025, and this is not going to change from last year. I always say 30 books, just because it's a very reasonable number of books for me to read that I know I can reliably hit every year. Internally, my goal is always 50 books, but I haven't even gotten more than 45 since early high school maybe. And so I'd rather just like undershoot and over-deliver. But a new added layer to this is that in January this year, I read 7 books. That is unheard of for me. I literally have not read that many books in a month since middle school, maybe. I don't know what came over me. Perhaps, the circumstances in the world had to do with it and I needed a distraction. But regardless, I'm keeping the goal of 30 because I don't know what's going to happen the rest of the year, and I want to make the goal. The next goal is that I want to read 2 nonfiction books. Basically every year since around 2018, since I started college, I told myself that I would read 1 nonfiction book per year, or at least 1, but it's never been more than 1. And usually in the past, it was some medical related book, like When Breath Becomes Air, Being Mortal, or Emperor of All Maladies, something that would kind of augment what I was studying in school. But this year, I do want to challenge myself to make sure that I am reading a medical book, but also a non-medical book. Specifically books that cover sociology or history or any of those topics, because I don't get exposed to those kinds of things as often in an academic context. One nonfiction book on my physical TBR that I want to get to is White Tears, Brown Scars by Ruby Hamad, which is going to talk about intersectional feminism, the interactions between white supremacy and class and race and gender and all those, and how that manifests in feminist movements. Particularly how white feminism has been weaponized against women of color. Kind of similar to this, I also want to read Angela Davis's Woman, Race, Class, I think is the title. Last year, I read Angela Davis's other work, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, which explores the intersection of police and prison violence with US imperialism and militaristic force through the lens of the Free Palestine movement and Black Lives Matter and how they're related. That book was really impactful for me. It kind of changed the way that I saw everything, and even it just being a collection of essays, I felt like there was so much for me to learn from. And so given that, I want to make sure that I get exposed at least once in my life to her seminal work, her core thesis and her beliefs, because everything that I've heard from Angela Davis so far has been very worthwhile. For the medical nonfiction that I want to read, I haven't decided exactly what I want, but I think it might be The Empire of Pain. I don't know the author, so let me look that up. Patrick Radden Keefe. And it's basically about the opioid epidemic in the US and how this one family dynasty kind of contributed to the industry of opioid distribution. That one's a long one though. It's over 500 pages, so we'll see if I get to it. The next type of goal I have is to kind of get back into reading fantasy series. Now, I definitely haven't fallen off of reading fantasy in general. I think last year my most read genre was still fantasy, but series in particular, I feel like I haven't been reading as much in the last few years. I feel like I read the first book in a lot of fantasy series, or I read a lot of standalones and light fantasy. So this year I definitely want to challenge myself to read more high fantasy or just complete some more fantasy series. In particular, I'm going to say this right now, this is going to be the year that I read N.K. Jemisin. I think I'm going to read the Broken Earth trilogy. I know she has a lot of series and a lot of really phenomenal high fantasy series, but I think that one is the one whose description is the most appealing to me. In the YA realm, I want to finally finish An Ember in the Ashes. I read An Ember in the Ashes, the first book, in 2020, a long time ago, and I loved it. And then I read the second book, A Torch Against the Night, and I didn't like it as much. I think it suffered a little bit from being a middle book, but I've heard so much phenomenal things about the series, and I love Sabaa Tahir as an author. Her standalone, All My Rage, is phenomenal. It's one of the best contemporary books I've read. So I do want to finally finish it, but I do think I have to reread the whole series at this point. Like, it's been too long. I need to get the story in full, and I know I'm going to like it. So I should just do it. And the last one that's been on my mind to read, and I just got off of the library, is the Cruel Prince series by Holly Black. This is a series that I have been avoiding for years. I don't know why, but I was so against reading this series back in the day. Like, I just was not interested. I was kind of against, like, I didn't like the new trend of all these fae books. And I feel like ACOTAR and The Cruel Prince were always recommended together because they were part of that rise in fae books. And I was not interested in reading ACOTAR, so I just assumed I wouldn't like The Cruel Prince. But since then, I have been informed that The Cruel Prince is actually nothing like ACOTAR, that it's much more politically driven, and that the characters are really interesting, and that the romance is actually a small part of the plot. Not that I'm against romance, I love romance in fantasy books, but it just wasn't what I thought the book was about, and now that I know it's something else, I'm much more interested. And the fact that it's been recommended for so many years, like, it's been in the zeitgeist of BookTube for like over 8 years. I just have to finally read it and see what I think. This next goal is going to seem like it's coming out of left field, because it is, but I want to read more bad books. I know, that's kind of like blasphemous to say. Reading is a hobby that I do for fun, to enjoy myself, so why would I want to make myself go through bad books? But here's my reasoning. I am someone who is very easily de-influenced from reading something. I feel like the minute that I see a negative review from someone that I trust, that book is like automatically moved down on my list of priorities, which makes sense because I have limited time, and so I want to make sure that the time I'm spending reading is going to be on books that I am more sure that I will like. However, I do feel like I am missing out on some books because of this mindset. And so perhaps I just want to change my mindset to being open to reading something that may be bad, just to give more things a chance. But I do actually want to read more books that I don't like. The reason is that I kind of want to hone my taste a little bit more and my ability to review books a little more. And I feel like to do that, you have to have both positives and negatives. I need to be able to see the full spectrum of books to be able to understand where other books fall in that spectrum. What kind of inspired me to think of this goal was an experience I had watching The Crimes of Grindelwald. Because I remember watching that movie and coming out of it being like, that was bad. And I haven't had that experience a lot with movies. Like, I've had a lot of experience with lukewarm movies or things that are just kind of like, eh. But that one, I was like, no, that was not well done at all. But the one good thing about that experience was that it helped me realize that, oh, I can identify things that are bad. Because sometimes I do get into these funks where I'm like, do I actually like this and actually think it's good? Or do I just like everything? And so I kind of want to have a few more experiences like that with books, because I feel like once you see how something is done very wrong, or dare I say horribly, I think it also helps you better identify when it's done right and better appreciate when it's done right. It's kind of like the opposite of a palate cleanser. It's kind of more like when you eat pickled ginger and your like sinuses and senses just like wake up. Like, you're kind of just like shocked back into reality to be like, okay, that was that. Let's move on. Perhaps The Crimes of Grindelwald is not a good example because I do not support J.K. Rowling at all. And I want to make clear that in these bad books, I'm not referring to books that are bad because they are problematic or have harmful behavior. I'm talking more about like the actual quality. And so to kind of summarize all that and make clear, I'm not trying to specifically seek out books that I don't think I'll like. I am not a sadist. But I just want to be open to all those possibilities and welcome all those experiences. I feel like also a good way to indirectly achieve this goal is to read new releases that haven't been talked about as much, or to read ARCs, because then I won't be influenced by anybody's opinion, and then I can genuinely just go in based off of if I like the description or not, and then whatever follows will come naturally. Okay, so now on to more specific books that I want to read in 2025. I definitely want to push through more of my physical TBR. That is always going to be the goal. I mean, physical TBRs are never going to be zero because I'm always going to be buying more books, but I just hate when books have been on my TBR for like multiple years. like books that I bought last year, whatever, but I'm going to be prioritizing books that I bought 5+ years ago that I still haven't read yet. Two of these books are Watchmen by Alan Moore and Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. Both of these are also graphic novels, so theoretically they shouldn't take that long to get to. I have owned these for such a long time, at least like 6 or 7 years. To put it in perspective, I bought these books at a time where I thought I would read them for Booktubeathon. So it's been a while. And other books that I have The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty. I would have to reread City of Brass in order to be able to read that, so that's going to take some investment. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Maybe that one I'll read from my medical book and finally finish it. Animal Farm by George Orwell. Another very short book. Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare. That one also I don't know if I'm going to read because I feel like I have to read Mortal Instruments, which I'm not going to do, frankly. But let me know if you've read Lady Midnight. Like, do you have to know a lot of what happens in Mortal Instruments? I have read it, but it's literally been 10 years. So we'll see, but I'm definitely going to prioritize those old books on my physical TBR. Now for some new releases that are coming out this year that I am looking forward to. Mainly these are authors that I've already read from and they have a new book coming out. March is a busy month. So many authors are releasing in March, and that is very unfortunate for me because that's when I start step 1 studying. We have Oathbound by Tracy Deonn coming out on March 4th. This is the third book in the Legendborn series, which I read a few years ago, and I loved the first book. It was such like a breath of fresh air while also being a taste of nostalgia. Like, it gave me the same feelings and eagerness to read that I had reading Six of Crows or Cassandra Clare books. The second book I did not quite like as much, but I am still like, I will read whatever Tracy Deonn writes. I'm so invested in this world. It's a King Arthur, Merlin-inspired retelling. Takes place at a university and really grapples with the history of white supremacy in this country. We have Sunrise on the Reaping coming out on March 18th, which is the new Hunger Games prequel about Haymitch. Like many of us, I will be sat for this release. I will be acquiring it the day it comes out. I reread The Hunger Games last year and it truly revitalized like a love of YA and YA dystopian for me, so I'm so excited to read this one. We have Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green coming out on that same day. John Green is kind of entering his nonfiction era. The last book he published was The Anthropocene Reviewed, which is a collection of essays that he wrote kind of ruminating on the Anthropocene, which is like the geological period that humans are in, I'm pretty sure. And I really liked that one. As someone who grew up with John Green, watching him on YouTube, I just enjoy listening to his thoughts and his takeaways and analyses on things. And this book is about his most recent passion and advocacy project, which is about tuberculosis. I believe it's going to talk about his experience going to Sierra Leone and seeing firsthand the impact of tuberculosis, which is something that we have treatments for. It is not like an untreatable disease, but because of limited access and artificial gatekeeping by pharmaceutical companies, that you can have such like devastating consequences. So I'm really excited to read that. We have Emily Henry's new book, A Great Big Beautiful Life, coming out on April 22nd, which is reportedly inspired by the Last Great American Dynasty song by Taylor Swift. We have A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping by Sango Mandana, who wrote The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I loved that book last year. It was one of my favorite books of the whole year. It was so cozy, so sweet, but also having a lot of heart and depth to it. So she has become another new auto-buy author. We have My Friends by Fredrik Backman coming out on May 20th. This one, admittedly, I have no idea what it is about, but I see Fredrik Backman's name and I read. Fredrik Backman is probably one of the only authors where I have read many of his books and I have loved nearly everything. He has such a way of capturing people and humanity, as cliche as that sounds, in a way that is so quiet but also impactful. We have Catabasis by Arv Kuang coming out on August 26th. Again, a very highly anticipated book for the book internet. I'm seeing it all over TikTok. People just got their like arcs for it, which is so exciting. I love Arv Kuang's mind. I feel like she has such interesting perspectives and things to say in her books that I at least don't see covered as often in the mainstream, and for that I really appreciate her writing. And I believe this book is about like this character's descent into hell, which is very fascinating. Not sure exactly what that means, but I am sat. We have Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross coming out on September 2nd. This is going to be a companion novel to the Divine Rivals books. Again, not really sure who or what it's about, but I see Rebecca Ross and I buy. I will literally, from now on, I will read anything that she writes. I feel like I'm being a little over ambitious in all these books that I'm trying to read, especially the new releases, because I think last year I didn't read a single new release, maybe one. But I feel like this year I'm kind of like back on it. I'm back into tracking these things and hopefully I'll follow through. So those were all the goals that I have for 2025. Please let me know any your goals that you have, any particular books that you're looking forward to, your reading count that you want to get by the end of the year, or any kind of like silly or random goal you may have, kind of like my reading bad books goal. I would love to hear what you have to say. If you like this video, please consider liking, commenting, or subscribing if you want to see more of my videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.